Okay, so fall patterning. So bass in the fall. So I take fall, late September into November when those shad really start to die off. And fall is basically when those days start to getting shorter. When they start to get shorter, those bass realize that winter is coming and they need to start feeding up. So you may be surprised, but in late September, when that water temperature is still really hot, those bass will actually be moving up very, very shallow, chasing shad. Those shad are the same way. They're starting to group up that time of year, and when that water starts to get cool, they're coming up more to the surface, to that warmer water to stay warm, and then moving shallow as well. And that's the whole goal of the bass this time of year. They're starting to think about feeding up for winter, so they're looking up as well, chasing those shad. And that's why shad style baits are so big, because those bass are looking up, feeding on those shad. And the areas I like to target this time of year, really you can look several different places. I like to start on those main points, those points that are flat. The flatter and bigger points that you can find, the better. Typically those are going to hold more shad, which draw the bass in. But you also look on flatter, shallow banks. And I'm talking anywhere from dirt shallow to 3 foot, 4 foot style banks, especially those banks that they don't get deep for a long time. They go way out, because those shad will move up there and roam around, and those bass can easily trap them and ambush, because that water column shrinks and it gives it more chances for that bass. It's kind of like pinching them down. So it makes it easier for those bass to feed. So look for those main lake points, and then you can move back into the creeks too, because that's what the shad are doing. They're moving back into the creeks because there's shallower, warmer water typically back there. The shad will move back. So that's what the bass are going to just follow the shad. So you're looking for those same secondary points, flatter style banks. Doesn't necessarily matter if there's rock on it. If you see a tree laying in the water, always throw at that, because there could be a bass around it. But you're looking for those shallow, flatter banks and points. And as it starts to get colder, really, it can make it even better, honestly. Those shad are starting to kind of get a little bit slower and die off. So those bass are really getting more aggressive, because they know the days are getting shorter too, so they're trying to feed up. But it just makes it easier for them to feed, so they're everywhere, up on those shallow banks. And for baits, really, it's going to it's the same deal. Early on in the spawn, I'm going to do more of the top waters, jigs, slower moving baits. Because the water's still hot, they're kind of not as aggressive because the water's so hot. And then as you get into, when it starts cooling down, those shad are moving even shallower. You start to get a little bit of wind, and with that wind, you need a lot more noise with your baits. So I'm getting more crankbaits, lipless baits, spinner baits, baits that are making more noise and still mimicking shad, and still going to look shallow until late November, when it starts getting more in the winter, then that pattern's going to start to die off, because the shad are dying off. So those fish aren't looking for shad as much anymore, and they're starting to settle into the winter conditions. And that's going to kind of transition you back into those baits we talked about in the wintertime.